The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
And we are back to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but we have a great show lined up for everyone tonight.
We really do.
Genevieve, how you doing over there?
I'm doing quite all right. I'm a bit hot in here.
It's that time of the year, folks. We're officially in summer, and boy, this week it's been a crazy week to be the I think the first official week of summer. Right? We got England voting out of.
Well, we had the summer solstice
EU.
on the 21st. Oh gosh, no! Like I am signing petitions up, down,
that's a
right,
little
and
closer
left.
to you, isn't
Yeah,
it?
like I want a revote. I mean, I wasn't there, but I know all my friends want a revote, and I am standing behind that, and I am just sad I can't be there to put my vote in.
Yeah, no. I mean, between that and what's going on in Oaxaca, I mean, the world it's a pretty
world is
wild
going
place
to
right now. Tonight, we're going to touch on something that maybe has something to do with the people up in the higher echelons of power that maybe allow some of these things to occur in the world for whatever agenda they may have. And let me kind of like set it up for people really quick. Tonight, our guest is Mr. Jay Dyer. I came across a really interesting article that he wrote on the movie Eyes Wide Shut. Now, anybody that knows me knows I'm a big fan of Kubrick and a lot of his films, and Eyes Wide Shut is probably at the top of my list, believe it or not, of films that Kubrick made. And I remember watching this movie shortly after it came out, and it was one of those things where I was watching this thing, and I felt like I was getting some information that I just wasn't ready to comprehend or process.
I think what you mean is you felt a bit voyeuristic, but like involuntarily voyeuristic, you know?
Yeah,
I think that's what a lot of people got from it.
And just to kind of give you a context, you know, I remember watching this movie before 9/11. And then after 9/11, that event, you know, I'm sure it had the same impact on many people's lives. 9/11 really made me re-examine everything I believed in and question a lot of things.
Of course.
And I began to see things like this movie in a different light, you know? Mm-hmm. Shortly after that, I heard of Bohemian Grove and some photos from a 1972 Rothschild dinner party where everybody was dressed very weird, almost like you see in this film, Eyes Wide Shut. Now, what's interesting is that it also kind of opened my ears, and I began to notice things that I don't think I would have noticed otherwise. And I'm going to share two quick stories with the folks at home before we introduce our guest. This is a true story. I had a good friend who was going out of town, and he needed to leave his car somewhere, you know, while he was gone, just because, you know, it was a nice car. He didn't want it to just be sitting out on, you know, on the street. So he asked me if I would drive my car behind his to this place in San Diego. And, you know, he would then drop off the car and we would drive back together. And I remember we dropped off the car at this very fancy gated community, you know. So my friend went, you know, dropped off the car. And on the way back, as we're driving, he begins to tell me that his friend who lived in this gated community had told them that on the weekends, everybody that lived in this community would have a party, you know, at one of the houses in this community. And they would, it basically sounded like, you know, it would be some kind of like spouse swap type of thing, but they would just, you know, kind of be, you know, do some
Happens
funny
a lot
things
nowadays,
about it. Yeah. And he was basically inviting my friend and his girlfriend to partake in it. And obviously, when he told me this as we were driving back, the first thing that came to mind was like, Eyes Wide Shut, right?
Of course.
Then I think a little bit before that, I was talking to another friend of mine, and I was living in Orange County at the time, and there was a little local newspaper. I can't remember the name. I've been trying to remember all day. I can't remember what it was called. But it was a small local newspaper where they would give you, like, the news that would go on there would be, you know, oh, somebody was arrested attempting to shoplift at a liquor store, right? It was like a very small little newspaper. Well, in this little newspaper, my friend came across a story about the cops responding to a call in Anaheim Hills where apparently they found a kid. I can't remember the age. I'm going to guesstimate it. I think it was somewhere around 9 years old. But apparently he had died of asphyxiation. And the way they found him is, I guess he had plastic wrapped all around him. And my friend begins to tell me this story that apparently there were rumors going around that in Anaheim Hills, some of the folks up there, they were doing some really weird, sex type rituals
stuff.
with, involving their kids. And, again, my head went straight back to Eyes Wide Shut. So as you can tell, this was a film that really set me on a certain path. Obviously, I've looked into 2001 Space Odyssey and all these other things that Kubrick did. And yeah, I believe that there is something more there. If you dig, you will find it. But you know what? I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let Genevieve introduce tonight's guest. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Mr. Jay Dyer?
Jay Dyer is essentially the go-to name when it comes to all things esoteric in the scene of Hollywood movies. Mr. Dyer is a writer and researcher from the south of US with a BA in philosophy. His website, jaysanalysis.com, has grown to become one of the premier sites on the net integrating both philosophy and film. The website showcases his talents. His graduate work focused on the interplay of film, geopolitics, espionage, and psychological warfare. Jay is also a public speaker, lecturer, and comedian, as well as author, of course, of the popular Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. He also runs a podcast by the name of Jay's Analysis Podcast, Esoteric Hollywood. Furthermore, he's a regular contributor to 21st Century Wire, Soul of the East, and the Espionage History Archive. To date, Jay has authored hundreds of articles already read by millions in just the past few years. And really, with that, I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Jay Dyer onto West of the Rockies.
Jay, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you?
We're doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and discuss really this fascinating film that is Eyes Wide Shut. Let me start asking you, how did you come across this movie? Were you already a Kubrick fan, or was this something that you kind of watched one day and decided that, you know what, it requires some research because there's a lot going on here?
I was a high schooler in the 90s, so I didn't really know what was going on in a lot of the films that I watched when I was in high school. So a lot of the David Lynch films, a lot of the Kubrick films stand out because I remember, I think 1999 that Eyes Wide Shut came out. I was confused as to what is going on in this film, and I felt the same way in David Lynch's 90s movies, like Wild at Heart or Lost Highway.
Right.
And I started noticing, you would see themes in these films. So by the time that I got to college and then into just my personal research with philosophy, the realms of the esoteric, I started noticing a lot of the stuff coalescing, and of course I saw, Jay Weidner's films and all that, but I'm not dissing Jay Weidner. I think his stuff's really good, but I had done similar analyses prior to that of my own of 2001 and of Eyes Wide Shut, and it really just started to coalesce over time. You start to notice, I guess, through your own process of philosophical reflection and journey, you start to see, what these symbols mean, what they're trying to communicate, these different directors, and what's going on in the background of Hollywood. And I think that there's no better preeminent example than Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah. To me, I always had the feeling that Kubrick was trying to tell us more, but not using words, obviously. And he was a guy that was all about the symbolism, it seems, in a lot of his movies. What are some of the themes that you find across some of Kubrick's films that go beyond Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's quite a few. One of those is, of course, class warfare. Kubrick, as I understand, had a kind of typical sort of anti-establishment, left progressive perspective. So you'll see a lot of class warfare. You'll see a lot of picturing of the American elite as kind of this decadent, degenerate class of persons that really oppress those under them. So I would say that Kubrick probably has some kind of a general Marxist framework that kind of comes out in some of the films that he directed or was involved in, Spartacus to some degree, if I recall. And that was actually a bunch of the people that were supposedly on the blacklist back in the period when the FBI was supposedly involved in fingering a bunch of, Hollywood top people. And I think a lot of that was actually stagecraft, too. I think some of those people were playing roles to hype up the Cold War. So my take on the Cold War and all that was that it was kind of political theater. But at the same time, so Kubrick likes this idea of Spartacus. And the reason Spartacus matters is because if you look at Adam Weishaupt at the Bavarian Illuminati, they would utilize these terms, these names like Spartacus, right? Spartacus Weishaupt. So the Spartacus Union of the Weimar Republic, for example, that became kind of a code name for persons who believed in that kind of ideology. So on one level, Kubrick is, I think, seeing over time what was actually at the top of the pyramid for either the right or the left, and that's these people that we're talking about, what we might call the Illuminati or whatever term you want to use, the globalists, the oligarchs, the power elite. And then what we've seen in other films, such as Barry Lyndon by Kubrick or The Shining, these all have the same theme of mind control, trauma-based mind control, pedophilia, alternate personalities, even with Danny in The Shining. I guess Tony is his alternate spirit person, right? If you recall, right? It's
yeah.
It's like, bad.
Yeah, his little fingerprint. Although that sounds kind of wrong when you say the
dude, right, finger puppet dude. But so that's what we see in that. That's what comes to mind. I mean, obviously, you can find a lot more themes if you really wanted to be deeper into, the whole Kubrick canon. All the way back to what Killer's Kiss and things like that. But usually, you're dealing with the establishment oppressing, and then I think by the time of his final film, Eyes Wide Shut, he's saying, "Oh, actually, what you think might be this anti-establishment cult or movement that might be considered leftist or progressive, some sort of sex cult or some sort of, Hollywood elite or whatever, that's actually part of the same establishment." So I think that's what's so astonishing about Eyes Wide Shut is what it says about what really goes on. And there's numerous books, numerous journalists have done research exposing stories, Dave McGowan in Program to Kill, right, where you have revelations of actual examples of what you see in Eyes Wide Shut, the Dutroux affair, and those actually tend to be much more extreme than what Kubrick showed us.
Yeah, let me ask you something, because this is a question I've always asked myself about Kubrick. In your opinion, do you think Kubrick attended some of these type of events, and that's why maybe they look so real and almost, as Genevieve mentioned earlier, voyeuristic? Because I almost feel like I'm watching something I'm not supposed to, particularly during the mass ball scene. Yeah. But do you think that Kubrick was exposed to all of these things, or do you think he just read a few books on it? Or what's your take on that?
I've read some books on Kubrick and his life and his work, film analysis, and so forth. And I don't know of any direct evidence to prove that, but I think that you can surmise reasonably that that's probably the case. I don't know that he attended or was involved in that, but he's saying, to people like Bill Harford in the film, the Tom Cruise character, these are people that feel like they're at the top of the totem pole, right? He's a prominent New York doctor.
Right.
His wife is, an art critic or
art
artist or something.
Yeah.
So in other words, they kind of think they're at the top of the pyramid, and they realize, oh, actually, there's a whole other level of wealth above me, and that's the real power structure. And so I think that Kubrick, being a director who, didn't come from money, he discovered that that's what was above him. So even if you're a A-list hotshot director or actor, you find out that, oh, actually, there's billionaires and trillionaires out there, right? And that's who really runs the show. So I don't know if he was a part of any of that, but Vivian Kubrick's daughter, has talked about in interviews that the CIA would come and talk to Kubrick about the movie, the Air Force and NASA. So he was certainly moving in those circles, but, as to what his personal tastes were, I don't have any knowledge, but Vivian seems to, talk about truths that were going on in the background here and there.
Before we start breaking down the plot, I want to talk a little bit about the production of this movie, because it's almost like the story about the production it's just as fascinating as the movie itself. Guinness World Records recognized Eyes Wide Shut as the longest constant movie shoot for over 15 months and a period that included an unbroken shoot of 46 weeks. So that gives us an insight into Kubrick's mind and how he went about filming and the type of perfectionist that he was. One of the things that he took a lot of criticism for when the movie first came out was his choice of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman for the starring roles. A lot of people felt like they were too, not very, I don't know, animated, I guess would be the word. However, I feel like they almost are meant to play those roles. What is your take on that, on using Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman? And maybe if you can, we all know about the controversy of Scientology and Tom Cruise. Did that at any point play a role in this whole production? It
certainly could. And if Vivian is right that the CIA, would talk to Kubrick at times, visited him about the scripts and so forth, production, then it stands to reason that the CIA is also in the background of Scientology. So I've done some interviews with a friend of mine, Mark Packard. He's done a lot of research into this field, and he talks about that and has done some articles on that as well, and that there is definitely in the background of L. Ron Hubbard and Crowley, right? He's running in all those circles. You also have Western intelligence agencies, British intelligence, CIA, and so forth. So that's definitely in the background, and I think it's, again, a very reasonable thesis to assume that Tom Cruise, I believe that in these big A-list roles, people are chosen for those roles for a reason. And a lot of times it actually ties into their personal lives, or at least what we know from tabloid media about their personal lives, which a lot of that is actually concocted and made up in PR and things like this too. So at that time, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were actually having, marriage troubles. I remember that being in the news and on tabloids. And so I don't doubt that, Kubrick chose them for a reason. So the bridge between reality and fiction is a big part of this. And I think that one of the goals of Hollywood is to fill in the gaps and give us a worldview, right? And so there's a reason why reality and fiction are constantly blended. So if you look at David Lynch or Kubrick, they're directors who are very influenced by surrealism. And surrealism is, this artistic group that's all about the dream state, and that there's a seamless blend between the waking state and the dream state, right? There's no difference between the two.
Yeah.
And so that's what's going on in Eyes Wide Shut. It's specifically called a waking dream, right? And that's what Arthur Schnitzler, who wrote the novel, wrote it as a waking dream. Yeah. And that theme comes up quite a bit. And so to tie this back into Scientology, when Nicole Kidman has her dream, she was having fantasies of this naval guy. Yeah. And it's just very curious that Scientology has that level of Sea Org, that part of that upper crust that L. Ron Hubbard created, which is this pseudo navy, like his own private navy. And that's what she just happens to be in a movie with Tom Cruise, where she's having this fantasy of a naval man of some sort. But so anyway, yeah, that's I think that is kind of a hint at what's going on.
I'm really intrigued and impressed by your view of the movie as essentially an initiation for the viewer into this realm of, let's say, the underworld. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of films do this. And I think 2001 tries to do that. I think Eyes Wide Shut tries to do that. I think there's some other films that are kind of big ritual workings is really what I would call them. And if you have that kind of perspective where you view artwork as a kind of ritual, and many directors and artists do, they see it as a way of, manifesting their will and intention into reality, and then affecting, the mass mind and so forth. And this is how this ties into psychological warfare as well, because you can see how those two perspectives pretty much have the same end goal. What I'd say Eyes Wide Shut to be is the title itself gives it away. It's you, the audience, your eyes are wide shut, even as you're watching it. And, how many millions of people watched that film over the years, even though it wasn't a great box office success, it was kind of misunderstood and people didn't know what's going on. When you watch the film upon reflection, if you have some insight into this kind of stuff, research it, you start to see that, as we said, there's a lot deeper stuff going on, and I think that the main deeper thing that's going on is that it's intended to be a kind of, like you said, initiation ritual. So film as ritual is the first chapter in my book, Esoteric Hollywood, and that's kind of my thesis there. That's what I'm going with, and I use Eyes Wide Shut as my first primary example of that. And so what does that mean? Well, if you think about, I guess the easiest way would be kind of what the idea of shamanism is, or a shamanic journey is, that, you take a person, and the shaman is supposed to lead you into, the alternate world, spiritual realms, so forth, the psychosphere, and then you come back from this, out-of-body experience or drug experience or whatever form of meditation or whatever, and you come back and you are intended to be, enlightened. You're supposed to be on the other side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what Kubrick's doing is he's doing a kind of version of that, where he's maybe not so much in the shamanic tradition as maybe something more Kabbalistic. He's saying, I can show you how the system works, and none of you are going to get it, or at least most of you, probably 95% of you are not going to get it. You're going to see it as just this movie, and you're going to have a voyeuristic fetish about looking into the lives of A-list stars and seeing their sex life and all this stuff. And what it's really about is a reflection. That's why mirrors are constantly seen in the film. It's a reflection of the viewer. It's saying something to the viewer. It's that you don't know. You are the profane. You're on the outer portico of the temple. You don't get what's actually going on. This is how the world really works. You're like Bill Harper, and I'm going to reveal this to you, and your eyes are either going to be open or they're going to be wide shut.
Jay, let me ask you one question. I remember reading about this and thinking it was really interesting that Kubrick had a fear of flying, and for this reason, Eyes Wide Shut, although it takes place in New York City, was actually filmed in England. And, a lot of people complained about that. However, do you have any backstory as to why he developed this fear of flying? And does it have anything to do maybe with something a little bit more nefarious than just a simple fear of flying?
A lot of prominent people, especially if you're senators who might be investigating something, right? I mean, how many senators' planes have blown up, right?
True,
quite a few. So, so that's kind of a natural paranoia, I guess, if you reach a certain level of stardom or whatever. So that's entirely possible. I actually didn't know that about Kubrick. I didn't know he had a fear of flying, but it makes sense. And he doesn't come off as somebody exceedingly paranoid, although there are whispers that in his latter days he was perhaps worried about this film. And, of course, there's a lot of speculation and theories about the film itself being released at a certain time. I think that's probably true in a numerological sense. I also think that, for example, 2001, what happened in 2001? 9/11, right? I don't think that was by accident, but, could Kubrick have rubbed people the wrong way? Absolutely. I just listened to, an interview with some comedians on Mark Maron's podcast, and David Spade was talking about how his assistant tried to kill him.
Oh, wow.
So, you never know, right? I mean, Phil Hartman, comedian, right? SNL. Yeah. That's entirely possible. When you're dealing with elite cartels, which is, I think, pretty much what you're dealing with here, you're kind of running in a dangerous crowd.
It seems like he was definitely surrounded by some very, very scary people, really. And that was the thing about the movie. To me, at least, it was a very scary movie. There were so many times where I found myself kind of sweating and getting really tense. Now, obviously, we can't talk about Kubrick and conspiracies without touching on the Kubrick helped fake the moon landings. Before we go any further, what is your take on that theory?
I agree with Jay Wiedner that there's a good evidence to suggest that Kubrick is a very likely candidate for who might have done that. I do believe that what we're shown in the Apollo missions is fake. I don't believe that those are real images, but for numerous reasons. Dave McGowan's book on NASA, I think, is very good. But aside from that, there's a case, I think, to be made for Lookout Mountain Studios in Laurel Canyon as the site for where it could have been staged, because that was the Air Force's secret film studio that was specifically used to create propaganda film and who knows what else. And so it's actually now declassified that the atomic explosions that we've seen, those were actually created at Lookout Mountain Studios. So I think that's probably a better bet than Disney Soundstage or something, although that's entirely possible. But If you read, Dave McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, he goes into some length about this.
Yeah.
But it's Walt Disney, it's Cary Grant, it's GMA Stewart. They all had access to this Lookout Mountain studio in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And I think that makes sense as to a good contender. So if you're talking about the process of what Kubrick's doing, is that there was a certain lens, it starts with the Z, I forget, but the CIA actually, the Air Force allowed him to use this, outrageous $1 billion lens to film stuff for 2001. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense to me that, if they're going to let him use this special lens, then he's got to go along with things. And I think that was part of it. You can find articles on the lens that was used. I go into that in my book. But the process of front screen projection uses all these little tiny beads that are kind of taped together on a big screen. And what you can do is create the impression of a vast expanse, kind of a depth, while in the foreground you have, something very simple like, 3 or 4 monkeys or guys in monkey suits and some hills. And then you've got the impression of some vast expanse. And a lot of people pointed out that what you see in a lot of the moon imagery does seem to look like the background is utilizing these tiny beads and the tape that might have been used to hold the beads together. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're seeing in the anomalies of the moon images. I think that's very, very plausible. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, there's like a million other things about the Apollo missions that really, I think, call it out as preposterous. Other than that, I mean, there's just a mountain of things that don't make any sense. Like, why do we not go back?
Of course.
And, all the defenders of NASA say, well, there's just nothing there. We know all that we know. It's just a bunch of dust, so we don't need to go back to the moon. But, of course, this was like the biggest deal in the 60s, and I really think that it's more of it was a Cold War psyop. That was what the moon was about, propping up the mythology of America. And I think that maybe since Kubrick was probably involved in that for a time, if he did shoot this footage, he probably was sick of that, given all of his criticism of the American system and American imperialism and all this in his films. He probably felt like it was kind of ridiculous, and whether he shot it or not, or some other director or the Air Force did it or whoever, it's the same principles at work here, that artists don't like to be, have their hands tied. They want to be able to freely do the art that they want to do. And if you're working for the system, you can't do that. They don't let you do that. You have to do what they want you to do. And they probably baited him with, this Dyer camera. I forget the term, something like that. This $1 million lens that he was allowed to use or something.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned, well, not funny. It's actually, on a somber note, I guess. You mentioned the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. We actually were, working on scheduling Mr. David McCowan to be on the show, and unfortunately he passed away before that could happen. Yeah. But I started reading his book, and it was a really interesting read. I recommend people check that out. Yeah. Well, let's go back to Eyes Wide Shut, because obviously we could do the rest of the show just on whether Kubrick faked the moon landing, and a lot of people obviously point to some of his films, and like you said, artists like to take credit for their work, and it seems that's what Kubrick was trying to do in his films, according to some of the people that have looked into this and researched the film. But talking about Eyes Wide Shut, why don't we start looking at the plot of this story? Because a lot of people blame the movie for being too slow, or they felt like there were a lot of unnecessary shots, but as we have established, Kubrick was just a perfectionist. In my opinion, a true artist. One of the first things I noticed when I watched the movie was just these vivid colors, and it seems that every time,
so stark.
Yeah, it seems every time, Tom Cruise's character, Dr. Hartford's on the scene, you have like this very bright blue, and you see these cold colors in contrast with these warm colors, and it's almost like it's creating a dichotomy in the film. Am I reading too much into it, or what's going on with the cinematography of this movie?
No, absolutely not. You're absolutely not reading too much into it. You're reading it correctly, because, color and art direction is a huge part of the film, obviously. So, if you watch any DVD commentaries, they'll generally drift off into talking about the technical aspects of the film, and they'll always go into that kind of stuff. And every now and then you'll get people who are insightful in the commentaries actually explaining, the symbolism. I think Roger Ebert's commentary, for example, on Orson Welles' Citizen Kane is very good for that. He actually talks about a lot of the symbology, which you don't usually get that. Unfortunately, you usually get the technical, boring stuff, but that shows that what you're saying is right. I mean, there's absolutely forethought into choosing which color scheme you're going to use. And colors have a lot of meaning and a lot of symbolism. I mean, obviously, our world itself is color. Color magic is a big part of everything. And you read somebody like Anton LaVey, he talks about color schemes and how this can have an effect on the psyche of those around you. This gets into a branch of philosophy. It's called semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbols, which is something I dealt with quite a bit in my undergrad and graduate work. And my thesis itself was actually about semiotics. So how can you couple together images and symbols in a certain way to achieve the most efficacious effect, right? And that's what the artist wants to do. That's what film is intended to do. And you're absolutely right. So why the reds and the blues? Well, you're right. First of all, those are those in a way contrast. Not necessarily they're next to each other on the color wheel or relatively close. I guess you get violet out of that, but in a way they can contrast by what tone you use of those colors. And in that regard, I think that red is obviously has a lot of significance for bars, for blood, for sacrifice, for sex, for lust. Right, and then blue is very much this dream state. It's Uranus. It's the abyss. It's water. Right. These are all kind of fluid ideas that give us the impression of free thought, free flowing consciousness, the dream state. And I think that that's what the contrast of those colors, because the film is partly about. It is partly about the sexualized. It is partly Freudian. They do bring in Freudian analysis. Any of the critics that you read who are actual film critics that deal with this film will say, obviously Kubrick is dealing with Freudian imagery. He's dealing with existentialism as well with Jean-Paul Sartre and all the math. That's one of the key components of Sartre's philosophy is that we all wear a mask and we're all kind of hiding behind the roles that we live out in society. And that ties into the I guess you could call it color magic. And that's partly why I think Kubrick is, in a way, kind of working in a kind of Kabbalistic scheme. And you can really see that in 2001 for sure with the different stages of the planetary process that Bowman goes through as he exits the galaxy. And then as he goes into the time warp, Stargate or whatever, he sees this, he sees the entire color spectrum. He sees 7 diamonds. And so you got Roy G. Biv, you've got the fabric of reality itself, which is light and sound, or light and sound together vibrating at a certain frequency. I'm sure we've heard this kind of stuff. That's all I think true. And so I think that's why Kubrick is doing that. He's very keenly aware of these things, and he was aware of it back when he made 2001. And so I don't think he shed any of that by the time he did Eyes Wide Shut. And you could spend. There's people who've written whole books just on Eyes Wide Shut, and picking apart the probabilistic themes, picking apart the color schemes, the color magic, and all of that. But I think that's accurate. It's true.
And let me ask you about one of the scenes in the early in the movie, and this happens at Siegler's Christmas party. Tom Cruise gets pulled away from the 2 young ladies who are flirting with him. They take him to a very, very fancy bathroom. I mean, that bathroom is the size of my apartment. And inside he finds Siegler, the gentleman throwing the party, along with this very beautiful young lady who's passed out in the bathroom. What struck me about that scene, obviously, Siegler was, a married man. It's a Christmas party, more or less what you consider like a family type of party. Yet he's up there in this bathroom with this young lady who apparently had done enough drugs to get her in that condition. Now, the reason why that scene struck me is because what could possibly be happening? I've heard a lot about, for example, in the case of the Manson family. I remember hearing some of like the early followers of Manson saying that they remember him passing out LSD to everyone, yet he was always sober and in control. And that's something that we see in this room. Sigler is totally sober, visibly a bit upset that this girl, passed out. And the other thing that struck me is the fact that Tom Cruise doesn't really act surprised. I mean, even after the whole thing is said and done, he maintains this very, aura of calm and like, yep, just almost like another house call. What's going on in that scene? Can you tell me a little bit your take on that?
Yeah, my take on that scene is that this immediately follows the scene where both of them have been propositioned, if I recall, and so Sandor Savos has tried to seduce Alice Harford by citing Ovid in his book on seducing married persons. This doesn't succeed, although she seems a little bit interested. And then two girls who are quite attractive, and they actually identify themselves as Windsors, Nuala Windsor. The two of them try to seduce Tom Cruise, and he says, "No, I've got to go attend to this, disturbance." And this really kind of kicks off the large-scale. It's almost like they're crisis actors in a way, right? So, I mean, not exactly, but they're all, I believe, playing a role in this theater, in this stagecraft, right? They're all, or we might call it dramaturgy, which is a sociological term that's applicable here. So they're playing these roles, and it's all, I believe, staged and set up. Every single part is leading Tom Cruise down this road, as well as, I guess you could argue, Alice too, unless you think that Alice is part of it all along. But that's a different debatable question. So when they're in the bathroom, you'll notice that there is a painting on the wall above the beauty queen who's supposedly OD'd, and it looks just like her. So it's a red-haired woman who's nude, laid out, strewn out, right over her.
Right.
And we get the impression that, oh, wait a minute, well, that's an odd coincidence or synchronicity, right?
Yeah, that's a weird
So it seems to be planned, and I think Tom Cruise is a little unscathed, or he's not surprised because it's his upper crust buddy who's invited him to this thing, and so he's thinking, well, I need to cover for him. I'm not going to say too much, but the beauty queen, I think, is actually OD'd, but I think that it is still planned, and the fact that the painting is above her in the same pose shows that, and this is what leads him down the path of really questioning his marriage, questioning his sexual situation, sexual frustrations. And so this is kind of the kickoff event, because the proposition for him to have a threesome didn't go through, and they lead him down this other path, and that's my take on it, just off the cuff.
Another thing that happens, I think, almost parallel as Dr. Hartford is in the bathroom taking, care of this girl. And, Genevieve, you actually pointed this out, is when, Nicole Kidman's character, Alice, is, talking to,
Sandor Savos.
There you go. He starts, kind of talking about these, collection of bronzes and things like that. And Genevieve was saying, it sounds almost like mind control triggers.
Oh, yeah. It sounded like he was trying to just key in those words.
Yeah, it's there. I'm guessing we're going to take a quick break. So, we'll pick up the conversation on the other side. But really quick, are we seeing, are there hints of this mind control, MK Ultra type programming in this movie?
non-uptight programming.
Yes, there are. And this will be, I think, explicitly shown with the scene with Lily Sobieski, who is, Rada Serbija is Milic. He plays Milic in the costume shop, and he's hinting out who he says is his daughter. Yeah. And so I think that's exactly where it's going to be led. You're right.
Okay, cool. Jay, if you'd be so kind just to hang on the line while we take a break, we're going to play some tunes and run some station IDs. Is that cool?
Okay.
We're going to be right back with Jay. And real quick, here's a little bit of a fun fact, if you will. Nicole Kidman was, I actually read this the other day, believe it or not. I read from time to time. As Kidman was nervous about doing the nude scenes, Kubrick stated that she could bring music to liven up. When Kidman brought a Chris Isaak CD, Kubrick approved it and incorporated Isaac's song, Baby Did a Bad Bad Thing, to both an early romantic embrace of Bill and Alice and the film's trailer. So we're going to go to our break, with this track that, we played a few times on this show as a little, my little nod to this movie that's definitely one of my favorites. So enjoy this track. West of the Rockies coming right back. We're just getting to the thick of it with Jay Dyer, and, we're talking Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick, MK Ultra, Mind Control.
Really deep stuff.
Can't wait to get back from the break. So enjoy this one. West of the Rockies is coming right up in just a few.
West of the Rockies with Frank.
Open your mind.
And we are back to the second hour, West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. Boy, this show it's getting crazy by the minute. It's getting crazy by the minute. As always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at WOTR Radio. Check out the website, WOTRradio.com. And don't forget to subscribe. iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all those little tune-in. We're actually broadcasting on TuneIn right now, so shout out to everyone listening on TuneIn. I'm joined, as always, by Genevieve. You can find her on Twitter at Genevieve Uway. And on this station, Thursday nights, 8 p.m., hosting her very own show, No Added Flavors, fun facts, jokes, music, and a whole lot more. Here's something really cool. I found this actually yesterday while finalizing some of my notes for today. There was a Stanley Kubrick exhibit here in LA, I think in 2013, like the summer of 2013.
Yeah.
I went twice.
I remember.
Because it was, as a Kubrick fan, again, I went and it was amazing. They had a lot of cool props. They had some of the masks that they used in Eyes Wide Shut, as well as other props from, 2001 Space Odyssey, Spartacus, Clockwork Orange, The Shining. They had the typewriter.
A little
All work
anecdote.
and no play.
I actually stumbled across the shop in Venice when I visited when I was younger. Yeah. I stumbled across a little costume mask shop, and it said, it had a little like pane or so, like a little sign in the front window saying, official provider of costume masks for the Eyes Wide Shut movie.
Wow.
So I went in there and I bought myself a mask from the actual makers of those costumes.
And then you went to a spooky mansion?
No, but I do still have that mask.
That story would have been a lot more interesting.
I do still have that mask, and I do revere it very highly.
Yeah, no, I know you do. You've told me about that mask. And I'm obviously seething with jealousy because I wish I had one from like the same shop. But next to that, the next best thing, if you're in California or heck in the US, because this exhibit left Southern California and, it's been traveling around the world. Well, it's going to be back in California. This time it's going to be in San Francisco at the Contemporary Jewish Museum. Sorry, let me say that again. It'll be at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, June 30th until October 30th, 2016. So, check out the website, stanleykubrick.de. I believe that's Deutschland, right? That's the, that's the, right?
My country.
Yeah, so definitely check it out if you get a chance. I'm really considering doing a little road trip to San Francisco just to kind of see it again. As I mentioned, our guest tonight is Mr. Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis, and we're really excited to have him. Let me bring him back into the conversation. Jay, when we went to the break, I played this is how I will also sneak in my back announcing. We heard some Chris Isaak from the Eyes Wide Shut soundtrack, followed by David Bowie, and a song from his album Outside, and it was also in one of my favorite movies, Seven. What can you tell me about Bowie? I mean, we lost Bowie at the beginning of the year, quite an influential artist, but obviously his name also popped up in topics such as these. What are your thoughts on Bowie?
Well, I was going to tell you a quick story before we moved on to that. I was actually invited to an Eyes Wide Shut style party at a giant mansion.
Oh, what?
And it was pretty late. It was late in the hour, and the only costume that I could find was a cape with a Bill Cosby face. And so when I showed up, it didn't go well. All the women ran away, so I kind of backfired. But it was the only mask. I felt like Bill Hartford, but even in a worse situation. I'm joking.
Oh,
but anyway,
that was a good one.
so Bowie. Bowie's a weird guy, isn't he? Right? I can actually do a Bowie impersonation, but when I do it, everybody gets mad.
We will love to hear it. I mean, no, we won't take any offense.
Definitely.
Well, maybe here in a bit, but what I was
maybe
thinking
later.
was, if you watch, one of the first actual articles I did at my website was an analysis of Labyrinth.
Oh, wow.
Now that might sound a little silly, but actually, if you go and watch this, as well as Jim Henson's Dark Crystal, you'll notice that these are actually very esoteric films. And so those have actually been two of my most popular analyses over the last 4 or 5 years. So those have had multitudes of hits. And if you check those out, I go into some pretty deep Jungian style analysis, especially with Labyrinth, because I think there's a lot going on there, as well as some of the same elements of mind control, programming, and a lot of that goes on at the subconscious level. And you got David Bowie basically playing the witch there, right? He's this witchy character.
Yeah.
And a lot can be plumbed from there. You might not want to go into Labyrinth, but that's whenever somebody brings up Bowie, the first thing I think of is spandex and big flowing hair, like that big puff of hair that he has.
I remember that movie. Actually, that was another weird movie that was almost disguised as a family kid
like
movie.
Deceivingly fairy tale-esque, but not really that at all.
Yeah, there's some very dark stuff under all of that. But
it actually is. Yeah, actually, if I do ever get invited to an Eyes Wide Shut orgy, I'm not going to take the Bill Cosby mask. I'm going to wear the Bowie Labyrinth album.
Oh, dude.
That will be cool.
That'll be a hit. Make sure you send me an invite. Just give me the password. I'll show up. I'll be in a taxi, so just keep an eye out for me. But let's go back to Eyes Wide Shut here. Let's kind of move along with the plot of the movie. After Bill finds Ziegler with this passed out prostitute, they go back home, and in the next scene, I believe, or maybe the scene after that, we find Dr. Hartford and his wife, enjoying some of nature's goodness, if you will. And all the kids probably know what I'm talking about. But it kind of opens the door to this very awkward moment where it's almost like you're listening in on an argument. They get into a very heated fight.
Not even quite an argument, just an awkward moment.
Yeah, and it kind of sets Bill Hartford on this weird sexual quest, correct? What was really Bill's motivation? I mean, was he really that, did his wife really get in his head? Is that what happened?
Yeah, in a way, that's funny. So what this scene does is it establishes Bill's character as principally the one whose eyes are wide shut. Mm-hmm. And so he won't be honest. And that's what Alice presses him about, whether he wanted to sleep with those good-looking ladies. Mm-hmm. And he says, no, I would never do such a thing. Well, how could you think such a thing, right?
But she's
but of course he did, and she calls him out on it. And so he's lying to himself. He's wearing a mask, the mask of lying, so to speak, right? He's hiding behind this facade of what he thinks is a appearance of morals, and she knows that he's lying, and he knows he's lying. And so, but he won't admit that to himself or to her. And that kind of, as you said, it's like this domino effect that sets him on this causal chain of further down the rabbit hole, I guess you could say. And so he begins to think, well, maybe marriage isn't what I thought it was going to be. I feel trapped. I want to do something else. So he goes and he gets a call to the wealthy woman whose father has died. And she's a little bit older than him, and of course she propositions him, and he says no. And this is, I guess, intended to hype the tension of his sexual frustration. And so then he just sort of strolls about, right, just wandering. And this is where we have the scene with Domino. Mm-hmm. And this is crucial in the plot narrative because Domino, I believe, was at will be at the orgy, and she's part of the cult. This is why she later disappears in the film narrative. And one of the key indicators, of course, is that she's got masks all over her wall, and these masks, I think, are foreshadowing what's going to happen later on in the film. Mm-hmm. And she's also got a curious collection of books, which are quite strange, I would say, for a prostitute. She's a very adept student of Carl Jung and sociology, which, basically human psychology manipulation. So I think those are two key indicators that she's not what she's playing a role. And I can't recall if I mentioned this in my Eyes Wide Shut analysis, but there's a film and book that's really good called The Magus by John Fowles, famous British novel, kind of a classic of the 20th century. And I recommend it. It's very wordy, it's pretty long, but it's very similar to the narrative of Eyes Wide Shut, where you have essentially a Greek billionaire who uses a bunch of people in his cult, you could say, to manipulate an unwitting dupe, this know-it-all guy who's lying to himself. And so you get this same theme of basically billionaires and trillionaires who don't have anything better to do than to basically play with the world as a great stage or theater or chessboard. So anyway, I may be going too far off course here, but you're right that that's what sends him down this trail, leading him ultimately to Domino's domicile, and that will lead him down the road to Nick Nightingale, his buddy from college, who explicitly gives him the password to the ritual.
Yeah, and that is kind of strange, right? Because, I mean, Nick Nightingale had done that before. He says that he has, attended these parties, and he's got a sneak, quick look as to what goes on. And he almost just hands over the password without even trying to, be discreet about it. So yeah, that was really interesting. A quick note that I found, and again, just to kind of make an emphasis on Kubrick and his style of filming, or actually just his, his OCD when it comes to filming. Talk about Domino. The actress that plays Domino, her name is Vanessa Shaw, and she was contracted for 2 weeks and ended up staying there for 2 months filming her scenes. So, obviously Kubrick, I mean, her role was pretty small. I mean,
but significant.
It's also a cautionary tale, right? Because it turns out that she has, HIV, and it's almost like he came very close to do
significant.
It. Yeah. So for a very small role, her character actually has a pretty big impact on Dr. Hartford's life. Now, let's talk about this MK Ultra business that seems to be going on when he goes to get the cloak and the mask and the tux and the shopkeeper, his daughter. And tell us about that scene. What's going on in that scene?
Yeah, this scene is a big reveal about what's really happening. And so when Tom Cruise is kind of wandering about, he realizes that he wants to go to this thing, but he's got to have a costume. So the only costume shop that he can find is Over the Rainbow, right? It's curiously named, right? So we've got Wizard of Oz and we've got Alice, right? Alice in Wonderland, wife. Now, these themes are explicitly there, which I think pretty clearly point to, kind of classic archetypes of mind control and MK Ultra. And there's a reason for that. That's because, of course, Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, is known to be a pedophile. So, he had this fixation on, I guess, prepubescent girls. And it's not by accident that when Bill Harford enters Village's costume shop, there are two Japanese, I guess, businessmen, presumably, who I suspect are actually at the orgy as well, and they are wearing drag, and they're wanting to have their way with Milich's professed daughter, Lily Sobieski. And so she's underage, and this is the theme here of kind of the pedo stuff, which is a theme throughout, as I said, Kubrick films. I argued this in my Shining analysis that that's what's happening to Danny. This is hinted at in Barry Lyndon as well. And so, it's pretty explicit. It's not too hard to figure out what's going on in that scene. And I believe that it's tied into the cult. So, Kubrick could show that, but I think he's hinting at that through that scene. And another key indicator that you don't get unless you turn on the subtitles is that Lily Sobieski, when she whispers into Bill Harford's ear, when he's picking out a cloak, she says, "You'll need an ermine cloak." Now, what does that mean? Well, ermine is the traditional garb of the aristocracy. It's a cloak that you wear if you are the noble class. And so that shows that she was there. She knows where he's going. She knows what kind of group of persons he's going to be dealing with. And, of course, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but when Bill gets there, the hierophant or the leader of this group, the guy who's wearing the sort of cardinal outfit sitting in the center of the magic circle of super babes, he has a British accent. That's not accidental, right? We're not in Britain. We're in, at least in the film, we're supposed to be on the east coast of the U.S.
Correct.
Upstate somewhere. And who's this British lord type character who's, running this cult? Well, again, you need an ermine cloak to get into this affair, and an ermine cloak suggests nobility or royalty.
It's funny because when you mentioned that, it just clicked, because I always wondered, how did he just happen to get the right outfit for this thing? I imagine if I would have shown up to a shop after hours and convinced the man to open up, the odds of getting the appropriate garments would have been pretty slim. And he literally gets it down to a T. So yeah, it does seem like the young girl was privy to where he was going and what was
exactly she was, and that's because I believe that all of the people that he's interacting with, that this has been orchestrated. It's orchestrated to lead him down a certain path.
Yeah, it's almost like a Truman Show type of scenario. It's like everybody's in it except him, right?
That's a great connection. Yeah.
But what does that tell us about Alice? Because if we talk about Tom Cruise being, having his eyes closed, Alice definitely has her eyes open because she's the one that seems to know what's going on at every step of the movie, if that's just women, women tend to have an intuition. I don't know if it's just that, or are we literally being told that Alice's character, does she represent something?
Yeah, that's a great point. This is kind of a debatable point. I think you could argue the different possibilities about her character. Now, so there's a very interesting indicator when Bill comes home from some of his frustrated wanderings, and he comes into the kitchen, and he looks at her, at Alice, and she's giving the daughter math lessons. And if you listen to the dialogue in that scene, Bill's kind of standing there staring and listening, and she sees him, and she raises her voice a little bit so that he can hear it. So she's explaining the math problem, and she says, okay, well, see, these people, this person has more money than this person. They have a lot more money, right? And so she looks at him, and he looks at her, and this is after, I think he's been to, if I recall, it's after he's been to the orgy or right before. And that indicator is I think one of the good arguments that she is in on all this. She knows what's going on. And of course, obviously, when she has her so-called dream, right? Her dream is about what he went did.
Right.
He's either grown up in this situation of this cult and is a part of this. Maybe she's been mind controlled, like the beauty queen at the beginning. She was brought into this, and this is the way that Bill is being brought in. Perhaps she is intended to have some kind of clairvoyance where she kind of sees things on the unconscious archetypal level or senses it. Maybe that's going on. Maybe all three. Or there's the option, that she's also kind of being brought in down the garden path, so to speak, with him. Either of those are possible, I think you could argue, but I tend to lean towards thinking that she is in on it.
Honestly, it does seem to be that way. Let's jump to what's easily, my favorite, morbidly favorite / scariest part of the movie. To me, I remember the first time I watched this movie. As I mentioned earlier, I felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to. And obviously I'm talking about the masked ball or, the orgy scene, if you will. One of the things that struck me about this is just how elaborate it is. It's not just a very simple, a quick scene and, it's definitely not about nudity. It's not about, showcasing these beautiful women. The message here seems to be quite a bit darker. Just to give a bit of a production background, and I was reading about this, talking about Kubrick's perfectionism, and as the listeners could probably tell by now, Kubrick and perfectionism seems to go hand in hand a lot. But Kubrick's perfectionism led him to oversee every visual element that would appear in a given frame, from props and furniture to the color of the walls and other objects. One such element were the masks used in the orgy, which were inspired by the masked carnival balls visited by the protagonists of the novel, obviously making reference to the original novel. That I believe the English translation was like a dream story. That was the title in English. But
Right.
what do we make about these masks? Because they are quite unique. I mean, I could probably draw them by memory. That's how big of an impression they made on me. What have you found while you research this whole thing? What is the purpose of the masks in this type of ceremonies? I'm sure people may have seen the pictures from the 1972 Rothschild party, right? What's the purpose of these masks?
Well, a lot of things could be said about this. Bear a lot of resemblance to surrealist art as well. If you look at the artwork of Man Ray, who was involved in it looks to be the Black Dahlia situation. If you've looked at that film or that story with George Wardell and his circles amongst Hollywood elite, and the art of Man Ray and many of his buddy artists, it's that style. It's that 1972 Rothschild ball style. And that style is partly surrealist, partly abstract, so forth. And it's really, I think, intended to convey inversion in many ways. Man Ray, when he talked about all his art, it was all about basically anti-human, basically sacrificing people, cutting their bodies up, and displaying all this very bizarre stuff. And if I recall, he explicitly called himself Luciferian in some sense. So what I think is going on with the cult is that it seems to be just kind of a sex cult of sorts, maybe some oblique reference to Crowley. I had a friend who's done a lot of research specifically on Eyes Wide Shut, and he says, I don't know where he got this, so I can't confirm it, but that Kubrick wanted to do something Crowleyan in the music that was going to be done during the scene, and for some reason that didn't work out, so supposedly he chose a Romanian Orthodox chant, and he, I believe, put it in reverse as the story goes. Now, so what that suggests is inversion, and of course, reversing things is a kind of a Crowleyan principle. And you're basically, the idea here is that you're tapping into a dark side with the intention of basically increasing your power, is the simplest way to put it, right? Yeah. Basic sorcery, basic black magic. But this is a kind of, tantric sort of sex magic of sorts. And the masks, of course, also seem to signify anonymity, right? And so in the underground of this cult, you're allowed to freely do as you wilt, so to speak, amongst the members. And this is a different role from what you play in society. So it's kind of an ironic. I mean, you wear a mask when you're in society, being a doctor or the banker or whatever your role is. That's one part of the film. And they're also wearing the mask in the ritual as part of an inversion. And of course, masks go back all the way to animistic traditions, shamanistic traditions, right? Where you're evoking the deity or whatever. There's that idea is present, but I think it's mainly just to be anonymity. And another important point from a scholarly academic standpoint, when I was doing grad work, I did a lot of research on Renaissance balls and the tradition of the masked ball. And now this goes all the way back to medieval Europe, and it was common amongst the nobles to reenact the plays of the gods, many of which were orgies and were quite licentious. But this was basically kings, queens, nobles putting on masks and going to a big ball and having a play or a ritual or ceremony and then having a big party.
Wow.
So this is nothing new. The masked ball tradition is, hundreds of years old in Europe, and it has included orgies for a long time. And quite often, I would assume, the practitioners of sex magic.
Another scene within that sequence, at least something that I noticed this last time I watched it in preparation for this interview, is that Tom Cruise's character, Dr. Hartford, when he arrives to this mansion, I mean, it could be for a number of reasons, but I noticed that he doesn't join the rest of the group. He's kind of off to the side by a pillar, which I guess makes him stand out a bit. And there's somebody in the balcony that takes note of him. I felt like that was Ziegler, right?
I've always thought it was Ziegler, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to double check if you got the same vibe. And something that I wasn't quite clear on, and maybe you have some information on this, was everybody present that was wearing a cloak and a mask a man, and only the women in the circle were the only females in the group? Or did you find anything in regards to that? I mean, I don't know how much that would play into the role.
That's a good question. I've always assumed that it was kind of a mix of persons, that it wouldn't be an all-male cult per se, just because of the fact that they were very much pro-gay. So you'll see members of the cult are also homosexual. And so I think that suggests that they were more egalitarian than something patriarchal. The reason that it's a bunch of beautiful women, I think, is intended to suggest that who do we have? Well, we have a beauty queen, and basically this is just the recent crop of inductees who are the recent crew of babes. Now, Kubrick could have been trying to say that that women are pimped out by these kinds of things, which does happen. So that could be, but it's a good question. I've never really dwelt on that extensively, but you make a good point there.
And he gets picked by one of the young ladies, and who warns him that he needs to get out of there, that he doesn't belong there. In your opinion, how did they know that was him? Do you think it was just because they didn't recognize the mask or something?
I think that's kind of explained at a certain point later on, where they say you showed up in a cab. They knew right away that it wasn't you. But again, I think it's not just those crop of girls. This is supposed to also be Bill's initiation. This was the whole point of him being brought down this whole journey, and why I believe that all the people were actors, in a sense, on the part of the cult to lead him to that point.
Okay, because now you're tripping me out. So, and this is me thinking out loud, by the way. I apologize I don't have this question written. But do you think then when Red Cloak asks Dr. Hartford to take his mask and subsequently to take his clothes off, do you think that taking his clothes off would have been the signal that, hey, yeah, I'm down for this? Or, again, am I reading too much into that one?
No, I mean, if you think about the hazing that we hear about in groups like Skull and Bones, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. Now, one thing that I noticed in this whole sequence, and I don't know if you noticed this, and the reason why I kind of went back and looked into this, because I remember a while back somebody, I can't remember who, I wish I could give due credit, and I apologize, but I remember somebody pointing out that during the mask ball, if you watch their lower jaw when they talk, it doesn't really sync with the dialogue that they're saying. Obviously, this fueled the theory that there was a re-edit that was not Kubrick's cut, that was the one that everybody got to see in the theaters. Have you found anything in your research about that, about some inconsistencies in that regard?
I had not heard that. That's an interesting take on it. It also could be, Kubrick being such a perfectionist, it also could be intentional to suggest the waking dream state, which is part of the film.
Okay.
But my general take, I guess, could simply be summed up that it's his hazing ritual. I mentioned, the Skull and Bones. We've read or heard that, the process of entering Skull and Bones includes laying in the coffin. You strip down nude. If you saw Good Shepherd with Matt Damon, there's that whole scene where he's inducted into Skull and Bones, and he's basically he's mud wrestling nude with other dudes, and he's getting pissed on.
Right.
That's his hazing, and I believe that this entire sequence of events is Bill and possibly Alice, if she's not already in the cult, their hazing ritual.
Yeah, it's funny because the more I think about it now as we're talking about it, it would appear to be that way. It begins to take on this look that it wasn't all just a series of random coincidences that led him there. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the mansion where this scene was filmed? It seems to be property of the Rothschilds. A lot has been said about the Rothschilds. Does that play into this, what this movie's, what Kubrick was trying to communicate with this movie?
It's entirely possible. If we recall what we were talking about with the art and the mask, it was a 1972 Rothschild ball that we've all seen these pictures of.
Right.
So that's entirely possible. And if I recall, this was at one time a Rothschild estate, and I don't think it's owned by them anymore. I believe it's owned by British government, or it's passed hands several times. I don't recall who the present owner is. It's been some time since I looked at that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's also Bruce Wayne's manor, isn't it? Mentmore.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, well, there you go. So this was for a time the home of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental meditation, if I recall.
Really?
I've read that.
That's really
That's what I've read. So I absolutely believe that the site is chosen for ritual reasons. Yeah.
I remember, in the movie, it looks like an impressive mansion. It really made me wonder every time I drove past any luxurious place what kind of weird and crazy things could be going on behind those.
Yeah, there's a lot of those,
doors,
like, very
Well, supposedly
beautiful.
the Beatles were there, like, tripping out and
really?
meditating with Mahesh Yogi there for a
I
period.
can only imagine.
That sounds about right. Honestly, that sounds about right. There's something very Christian, if you will, as to how the young lady that intervenes to save Dr. Hartford during the moment when the Red Cloak has him stand before everyone. She uses words like redeem, that she's going to redeem him.
Right.
Later, when he talks to Sigler, and Sigler brings up this whole situation about, being at the party and seeing him there, he says, it was all theatrics, it was fake, don't worry about it. I mean, that sounds like a very poor excuse, because I always wonder if all of these things meant nothing, right? If all of this was just people wanted to blow off some steam and, have some fun. I mean, it's kind of a really strange way for people to have fun. So if it's meaningless, why go through these huge productions?
Yeah, exactly. If you think about cults or many secret societies, they have blood oaths. And some of them have the notion of blood sacrifice. And so the idea of the redemption, that's all, classical kind of biblical ideology from Leviticus, the Day of Atonement and the blood sacrifice and so forth. It also has the later Christian idea of redemption through sacrifice. Absolutely. So what I would say is, I think that Bill never knows for sure. Even the newspaper story, it said that she OD'd.
Yeah.
Bill is meant to think that she was killed, right? And so what this does is has the effect of scaring the pants off of him. And that's the point, right? The point of this was to show him that you are now kind of hanging out in a group of people that have a lot more power than you think, and they're able to pull strings at a much greater level than you ever imagined. So you'll never know for sure whether she was killed. Well, he does go and see the body, right? So I guess you could argue that, he knows for sure that she was dead, if that's her. But there you go. That's the point of it, was to display to him the seriousness of what he was sniffing around at.
It's funny because I've always wondered why, people would do these kind of things. I guess that's my main question. And that's why I never buy, the explanation a lot of times that people give, when talk about some of these kind of very occult practices that, it means nothing or whatever. It's like, well, there's obviously, there's some meaning to this. Otherwise, people wouldn't spend so much time memorizing all of these things and doing all of these things. Now, one of the interesting things that happens when, Dr. Bill is out there again and he goes back to look for Domino, is that there's a very interesting book on her little, bookshelf. One is a sociology book, but then the other book is called Shadows on the Mirror. And, it's by Francis, Fifield, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And it's funny because I was reading what this book was about, and this is what it says. By day, Sarah Fortune works as a lawyer in a prestigious firm in Mayfair, but by night she provides lonely men with intimate company, an arrangement with which she is happy until she becomes implicated with a dead body found off the English coast. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff there that echoes what we have seen and will see throughout that movie, correct? And I guess it's just a testament to Kubrick and his attention to detail. Because again, I think one of the biggest criticisms that this movie gets is people saying, I don't get it, so long, it's too boring. But I guess you kind of have to understand that for Kubrick, everything had a purpose and everything had a meaning, correct?
Yeah, it was not meant to be entertainment per se, I feel. It was not. It was meant to be a message.
It's a message and a ritual of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And one of the things that you said that I find really interesting, and I'm going to quote here, is that talking about Alice, obviously there is that scene towards the end of the movie where Tom Cruise comes back after he returns his costume, minus the mask. He comes home and he finds the mask on his pillow next to Alice as she sleeps. Obviously, I have to ask you, what are we meant to take from that? Did she find the mask and this is her way of saying that she knows? Or, was she
it a
just
subconscious act? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the key indicators. I mentioned earlier the math problem incident. This is another one. Yeah, this is one of the key indicators, in my view, that she knows what's going on and or is involved in the cult. Now, the one thing that would suggest that maybe she's not would be that when Bill tells her what he's been up to, she gets upset and cries. Now, she could also be acting, right? I mean, if she's part of the cult,
right,
then she's been playing along all along, and she may not want to give away to Bill everything that she knows, because she's just been kind of hinting and subtly signifying that she may know what's up with the dream, with the math problem, with the her knowing that he wanted to sleep with those two girls at the party, and so forth. So, yeah, that's the way I take the mask, is to be a signifier, most likely, of her involvement or knowledge of the entirety of the event.
Yeah, and something that you say in your analysis of the movie is that either Alice has been drugged and doesn't recall being used, thinking it was a dream, or she is a willing part of the initiation process for Bill. And I mean, both at this point, right, are pretty likely possibilities. Do you lean towards one or the other?
I think the weight of evidence suggests that she's a part of it. And, is she one of these women in the circle, maybe? I mean, think about just on a basic level, the beginning of the film, Kubrick shows Nicole Kidman's bare butt, right?
Yeah.
And when we get to the ritual, what do we see? Well, a bunch of chicks bare butt.
Right.
I think that's suggestive, right? So, that's what I lean towards. But, I'm obviously willing to be corrected if somebody has a better argument.
And that's the thing about this film, right? That it has so many layers that I think as time goes on, we will decipher more. We're almost out of time, but let's end, obviously, in the closing scene. They're out Christmas shopping with their little girl. There seem to be a lot of little occult symbols in this particular sequence. And of course, it ends with Alice telling her husband that, they need to have sex a little more, basically. What is the point of this scene? Because it almost seems, it doesn't feel like an ending necessarily. I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, wait, was that it? Did I miss something? You know what I'm saying? I was one of those people that was left a little perplexed because this scene, it's a bit strange there at the end. But what's happening here? I've read stuff that here you can see signals that their daughter is going to be initiated in the cult as well. And, that the bears mean this and things like that. What can you tell me about this whole ending?
I'm familiar with that analysis, and it is possible. It does look like the same people that were at the party. It does look like the daughter is kind of walking off. That could be. And certainly I believe the symbolism in the gift shop there is intentional with the magic circle. And we saw the magic circle at the ritual. We see pentagrams throughout the film, both upwards and inverted, which signify both good and evil. And the way that I take the last scene is kind of, they've had their eyes open, that's reference. And, Bill's kind of in this state of, he can either move up the social ladder, and go along with what the requirements of that will be. And the requirements of that will be, presumably you're going to share your wife if you go along with this to move up this ladder in this way, or you can go back down the ladder, totem pole of social structure, social order, and enjoy your married life. But if you want to try to go beyond that, there's a price to pay. That was the big message of the hazing is, if you're going to go through with it, there's a price to pay.
My last question, Jay, how would you categorize this film? Is it a horror? Is it a thriller? To me, it's a horror. But is it like a sexual thriller, an erotic thriller? Where do you see this film falling into?
I'm trying to remember the way that I see it very similar to David Lynch's Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, and I'm trying to remember the exact terminology I used, but something like a neo-noir, occult, Jungian, psychosphere, drama, erotic thriller or something. I guess that's I mean, I don't know. You could use a whole, bevy of appellations for this.
Jay, what can I say? This has been insightful and entertaining at the same time. Why don't you tell people your website and social media?
Right. So, I do jaysanalysis.com, just JAYS, analysis.com. And what I do is offer podcasts, interviews, philosophy lectures, talks on a variety of subjects from ancient philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, and so forth, history. Presently, I'm doing Dr. Carol Quigley's infamous tome, Tragedy and Hope, which basically gives the history of the 20th century. And those lectures are half free, and the other half is by subscription. So you can subscribe if you like my stuff. My book, Esoteric Hollywood, will be coming out in a couple months, and that can be pre-ordered at my website or Amazon or Trine Day Publishers, Trine Day. And then my Facebook and Twitter or any of that can be accessed there at Jay's Analysis. You'll see links on the sidebar for all that. And
can you give us just a quick little blurb what you're going to cover in your book?
Absolutely. So basically, I've written 110 or 20 film analyses. They got really popular, a couple million views, I think, in the last couple of years. And so I got offered a publishing deal, and I published about the 20 or 30 best ones, and I rewrote and added a whole bunch of material. So the Eyes Wide Shut analysis, for example, has been completely beefed up and revamped, a lot longer, a lot more info. That constitutes an entire chapter in the book. I believe there's 25 chapters in 4 sections. The sections are made up of Kubrick, David Lynch, Hitchcock and 007, and Steven Spielberg, and then a couple more 80s things like Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, and Ridley Scott films. And so basically, I analyze all those films in the exact same way that you've heard me talk tonight.
Wow. I'm definitely going to get a copy of that, and hopefully we can get you back on the show to talk about that book, because honestly, that sounds really, really fascinating. I kudos to you, because I've read a couple of your analyses on your website in regards to some of my favorite movies. And I must say, you, sir, definitely do your work. Yeah, you clarify a lot of things.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we'll definitely be in touch. I really appreciate it. I know you were on the road, and it means a lot to us that, in spite of that, you were able to join us and talk about Eyes Wide Shut at such length.
Absolutely, and next time I'll do my Bowie impersonation for you.
Awesome. I'll hold you to that.
Thank you so much.
Take it easy, Jay. Enjoy the rest of your night.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Bye-bye. That was Jay Dyer of
jaysanalysis.com.
Check out his website, check out his podcast, check out his book. That book is going to talk about a lot of stuff that you hear me talk about, right?
Esoteric Hollywood, sex, cults, and symbols in film.
Yeah, so definitely check it out. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for that book. It sounds really, really fascinating. And
no, I can't wait to read it. I love books, and this one is definitely some midnight reading time.
If you missed any part of the interview, definitely check out the website in the coming days, WOTRradio.com. We'll be posting it there. And I'll be posting some of the pictures that I took at the Stanley Kubrick exhibit when it was down here. And, like I mentioned, it's going to be up there in San Francisco coming up in about a month or two. So definitely check that out if you get a chance. As always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. The website is WOTRradio.com, and the Twitter is at WOTRradio. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes. I was going to say Twitter. iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all that good stuff.
Everywhere.
Genevieve UA on Twitter, and you can catch her right here Thursday nights, 8 p.m. on No Added Flavors. That being said, boy, oh boy, why don't we go out with this cover of White Rabbit from the
Leaving
Sucker Punch
you-
soundtrack, which is another movie that gets analyzed quite a bit at this level.
Leaving you with a lot to think about.
Yeah, no, this definitely was one of those shows.
This is one of those mind trip shows.
Well, you look pretty mind tripped.
I'm tripped out. I'm thinking about this stuff.
I know.
I'm constantly convoluting this stuff in my mind.
And you're not alone on that. Take care, be safe, God bless, don't do anything too crazy. Want to see you back next week. Until then, enjoy this little White Rabbit cover by Emiliana Torini from the Sucker Punch soundtrack. Here we go, folks. Enjoy. We'll see you next week.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.